I was 10, 11, 12, I don't remember, in line for the movies. And there were two guys in line in front of us, like 3 or 4 people in front of us holding hands. And my mother pulled me to her, not my siblings, just me, and looked at my father and said, "They're weird," which just made me look at those guys and I went, oh, now I get it. I'm weird like they're weird. And I looked at them and I thought, they look happy, they look like they're in love. I'll be fine.
Inform brings you incredible stories.
I left 2 days before the revolution. It killed me so hard.
James has never experienced the taste of fruits that haven't been attacked by pesticides, just like he's never experienced a neighborhood that hasn't been attacked by bullets. Some things just go hand in hand.
People say what's on their mind.
I think that it is a cardinal sin to lie to the American people about war.
Partisanship is a version of narcissism.
In downtown San Francisco, the Commonwealth Club's Inforum curates events that bring you face to face with the world's changemakers.
1/3 of the wage gains that women have made since the 1960s were made as a result of the birth control pill.
Twitter is a technology that I don't think we've seen before in this world.
Since 1903, the most innovative leaders have come to the Commonwealth Club to share their vision.
Sharing cars, sharing their homes, sharing. A shared dream, a shareable American dream. That could work.
You each can play a role in helping us chart a better future.
Housing and health and education and policy all live close to the surface in us when our children are murdered. It's all the same story.
We bring together the visionaries shaping the emerging trends in technology.
It was a combination of Instant and Telegram. It was the idea that you could take a moment in time and you could capture it and you could just send it out and broadcast it with the entire world.
I just threw the site together in about a week when I was at school.
Oh, great.
We've got angels, we've got incubators, we've got accelerators, we've got seed funds, we've got crowdfunding.
We eat, we drink.
One of our first dates ever, we pickled like 100 pounds of herring and made 300 pounds of sauerkraut.
Yay!
We never shy away.
75% of the people of this country want universal health care and expect it. And damn it, let's go.
Concentrated, deep, slow, loving, tender, passionate sex.
Whether you want to be on the cusp of current events or feast on pop culture.
I should have a great time writing it. I should write a book that is as fun as any party I'd be skipping.
Inform events are fun and action-packed.
I have an anthropology scarf that does that twisty thing, so.
Come feed your mind and soul and celebrate the future with Inform.
I love San Francisco, and every time I come back here, I remember that this is the only city in America that has magic.
Hello, and welcome to today's virtual program with Inforum at the Commonwealth Club. I'm Aarti Shahani, a longtime NPR journalist based in Silicon Valley. Today, I'm pleased to be in conversation with a friend and mentor, Guy Raz. Guy is co-creator of the NPR podcast TED Radio Hour and the creator and host of How I Built This, as well as Wow in the World. Together, his podcasts attract more than 19 million downloads a month. He is here to discuss his new book, How I Built This, The Unexpected Paths to Success from the World's Most Inspiring Entrepreneurs. If you'd like to ask Guy a question, please ask it in the chat if you're watching on YouTube, or in the comments if you're watching on Facebook. Let's get started. Thank you for joining me this evening, Guy.
Thank you for doing this. It's so great to see you. I mean, we're just a few miles apart in the East Bay, and here we are talking from
I should have had you over to my yard to do this.
And hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us virtually. If I could see all of you, and it wasn't COVID, I'd give you hugs and kisses, and especially you, Aarti.
Well, I will say that you look fantastic. You look remarkably well rested for someone who has been undeniably incredibly busy. So it's either great lighting or great skin, just as it is.
Great lighting and makeup.
So Guy, you asked me to do this, and I had so much fun preparing, just so much fun reading your book, which I thought was lucid, and I learned so much going through it. And we'll get more into what I learned. I want to ask you more about those parts. But I want to just start with a bit of the personal. Okay. So we first met in 2011. I was brand new to NPR, and my first assignment was to be one of your producers. Okay. You were the host of Weekend All Things Considered. And in my mind, you were totally living the dream. Okay. You're this celebrated beat reporter, award winning. He's a war correspondent. He ran a bureau in Germany. He gets paid to have smart conversations with very, very smart people. And I'm like, I want his life. Okay. And then I come to learn, as you explain in your book, How I Built This, that actually you were not living your dream. And in some ways you felt stuck.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting how perceptions, we have different perceptions of people. And you're right. I mean, we've known each other since then, and you came to work with me, and I learned so much about your life reading your book last year, which is just an incredible story, and felt like I really learned so much about you, and couldn't believe I didn't know it. I became the host of that show after really trying to kind of struggle to do that. I was a foreign correspondent and a domestic correspondent for NPR, and then for CNN for some time. And I really wanted to be the host of a show. That was my dream. And around 2007, I sort of put my hat in the ring to be a guest host for one of the news magazines on NPR.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, the group of executives who kind of decided who was going to be able to host shows said to me that I didn't have the right personality for it. Because at the time I covered wars, I covered the military, and
serious beat reporter.
And so what they said to me was, you're like a war reporter, you're a military guy, you don't really have the personality to be the host of a news magazine. You need to be more like, I won't say names, like this person or that person. Mm-hmm. And it really was a very hard thing to hear at the time, not only because it felt like an insurmountable obstacle, but also because it was a realization that, and I think so many people have experienced this. I know you've experienced this, Arthi, and everybody watching, which is when you work in an environment and you are there for some time, people develop what seems to be these unchanging perceptions of who you are and what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
You are essentially pigeonholed as a certain type of person.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is just human nature. We because we're, in a sense, we're kind of, our brains are lazy sometimes. And we just kind of say, oh, there's Joe does this, or there's Bill, and there's Guy, and he does that. And it really took me, a number of things happened for me to be able to become the host of the weekend show. Mm-hmm. Namely, some of these executives left NPR at the time, so that obstacle went away. But also, I left to do a fellowship, and that year was transformational for me. So in 2009, I had the chance to actually become the host of the show. And really, it's crazy, but my dream was to be the main news anchor. I mean, I had always thought, because I came to NPR in the late 90s. And for me, and my parents didn't know what it was. They thought it was a radio station. I didn't grow up listening to NPR. I wasn't like, that wasn't my family.
Mm-hmm.
But once they kind of heard me on the radio, and I think you probably experienced a version of this too. My parents are immigrants too. And so they would say, okay, yeah, so when are you going to be the main anchor? When are you going to be on TV?
It's never enough.
CNN, and this is, by the way, across the board. I mean, I just had Sal Khan on How I Built This, and similar kinds of things. Like his mom was like, when are you going to be, that kid, he's a PhD MD. Well, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And So I think in my mind, I thought, look, what I need to do is to be the main anchor of a news show on NPR.
Mhm.
And, that wasn't in the cards for me. I wasn't part of the grand plan. And it became pretty clear to me right around the time that you joined us that even though I was kind of guest hosting the main shows, I wasn't going to be picked for those jobs. And it kind of came down to a moment where I was told that straight out. And that was so hard for me because I felt like I couldn't progress, that there was
Like they sat you down and told you stop trying?
Well, no, nobody's ever going to say that to you, but it was like, what I was told in no uncertain terms is like, you just don't have, you don't have what we want to be the main anchor of the main shows. And, that really, it was a very hard moment for me because I thought, well, I've done everything right. And I'm trying. And you remember, I was so committed to this show, this little weekend show, to make it really great. And it felt like I kind of hit a wall. And around that time, I really began to think about, this is about 10 years ago, what should I do with my life? I'm in my,
You're about how old then?
Mid 30s. And I'm thinking, I got to do something else.
Yeah.
But what essentially happened, and what's so important about that moment for me is that failure, let's call it a failure, really forced me to kind of think about what I wanted to do and how to kind of, as much as I could, take control over my career. And that really was the beginning of a pivot in my career that moved me out of the news world and into what essentially became the podcasting world.
Right. No, it is really fascinating from, how a person looks when they're on that journey from the outside. And then, what you were experiencing was you've been told you hit a ceiling and there's no up to go. So now what? Guy, again, from the outside, I've always thought of you as a remarkably disciplined, creative, and ambitious person. Like you've got that drive of like, you feel to me like someone who would not take no for an answer. And so it even kind of surprises me that someone telling you you're not going to get what you set out for could have really touched you deeply in a way that, it's clearly, sort of driven and directed you in certain ways. But, I was trying to figure out, Guy, how to, it's like, what makes him so driven and ambitious? And you want to know what I did to kind of explore that question in addition to reading your book?
Please.
You want to guess?
I don't know.
I got a hold of your wife. Okay.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Hannah Stott Bumstead. Here's what she said.
I think when I thought about entrepreneurs, what I saw was people who were interested in financial success. And what I didn't see until I think I saw it in Guy was that entrepreneurs are people who are really interested in having the freedom to pursue their own vision. And for Guy, I think that has always been incredibly important.
So, first of all, she's lovely. And what is the vision that she's referring to? What's the vision you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because I think outwardly I probably have appeared to be ambitious and driven and all those things. And of course I am. I've always, my single pursuit in my career has been about having an interesting career. To me, that was always the measure of success. I never, I genuinely never thought money or fame or notoriety or external, gratification was the mark of success. I really thought it was an interesting life. And that's what I pursued. I mean, I started out as a reporter and then I was overseas for 7 years and I got to travel and report from 50 countries and cover 3 wars and conflicts. And for me, it was like, that was the progression, that I wanted to do things that challenged me and that excited me and that energized me, and I think like a lot of people, I always kind of need a new kind of stimulation, and in some ways, everything I've done has kind of happened in like 3 to 5 year cycles. So like, how I built this was started 4 years ago, and it was started in the midst of another program that I used to host, TED Radio Hour, and and I'm sure that there will be something else that comes along. But I'll continue to do how I built this, to have these
Don't worry,
conversations.
listeners.
But I think that for me, it's always been about having as much agency in my own life. And by the way, Arthi, this is the advice I give to everybody who works with me. I don't just and as you know, I don't work for NPR. I work with NPR as a partner. But I've always told people, whether they worked with me on the shows that I worked with, that I did for the news side, or whether they worked with me on TED Radio Hour, or even how I built this, I'm extremely lucky to work with highly talented and gifted people. And I've always said to them, I want you to know that you need to, make your own path. And if at some point,
You've
when
told
you
that
get
to me.
point
Yeah.
when you want to no longer work with me, come talk to me and let's start to design the next step. Because your life is not about making me sound good on the air or helping me. Your life is making you have an interesting life. And I remember thinking that, 25 years ago, when I was an intern and a producer, when I worked with, for some of the really great radio stars of the time, thinking, this is really fun, but I don't want to devote my life to there. I want to make my own things. And I want to, and that's also what's motivated me. And that's what I'm inspired to say to other people, that to me is an interesting life.
That's remarkable, I think, Guy, to not only know what you want, which actually a lot of people don't see it as clearly as you have, but then also to assume that other people have desires similar to yours, even when they're working for you. Because I mean, as you know from your countless interviews, building something is so hard. You might want to hold on as tightly as possible to the people who are there kind of as crutches, So
yeah, and it's really hard. I mean, here's what I would say. I don't think that I don't think everybody has to pursue an idea or a business. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that I think everybody can pursue their own path if they want to. That the idea of creating something, whether it's a business or putting out a disruptive idea into the world, or if you work for a company and you want to change the way things happen, what prevents most of us from doing that is fear. And it's the fear of rejection, because we are wired to want and seek validation. Like if I come to you and I say, Arthi, I have this awesome idea. Really what I want to hear from you is, I love it. Go for it. Now, there's some of that spirit here in the Bay Area, sometimes too much of that spirit. But most of my career, I lived on the East Coast, where it's the exact opposite. The answer is no, that's impossible. It can't be done. Forget it.
Yeah.
Right. So the default answer, and that's sort of what I experienced for a long time, which, by the way, was one of the reasons why I moved to the West Coast, because I was so attracted to the optimism and the yes and kind of outlook. But what I'm trying to kind of convey is that this idea that only some people are like touched by the hand of the gods, and can introduce big ideas or can create companies or, can make things, or is just not true. That I actually have come to realize from interviewing, hundreds of them, that the capabilities they have and the capacities they have are all really developed skills. And in some cases, in many cases, they didn't set out to be entrepreneurs. They didn't set out to create something. It kind of happened by accident. It kind of happened to them. And they had to be pushed to pursue it. And I'm inspired by that idea, because I think we not only we in the United States, but we particularly in this part of the country, we fetishize entrepreneurs. We kind of heroize them. And that's what I've tried to do is the exact opposite, to say, look, they're not heroes. There were times in their lives where nobody would pick up their call. Nobody would answer the phone when Howard Schultz called because he was just selling coffee filters. Nobody was interested in talking to Sarah Blakely before, when she was trying to develop undergarments.
Right.
And we all start at that moment. And so what I'm really trying to say is that, what makes all of these people remarkable, and what makes the idea of introducing something into the world remarkable, is the unremarkable aspect to it, that it's actually within reach. And it doesn't have to be, a rocket to the moon. It can be something that changes someone's life in a small way, but is still significant. And that's really what I think kind of, it kind of inspired me and motivated me and continues to motivate me.
Guy, and I feel from your work, something you've done is demystify entrepreneurship, right? So it's like, we all know, like on an Instagram or a Twitter feed, who looks big and impressive, but the backstory of the very unsexy work to get there is actually fascinating, and you relay it. A couple of minutes ago, you used a word, though, I just wanted you to drill into for a moment. You talked about fear and how fear gets in people's ways. And in your book, you made this incredibly important distinction that really had me thinking about my own life as well. You talked about the difference between things that are dangerous versus scary. Can you explain what you meant by that? Maybe even vis-a-vis your own experiences.
Yeah. So this really was inspired by Jim Koch, who founded Boston Beer Company. And at the time, he was a successful consultant for Boston Consulting Group on the fast track to partnership. He was earning a lot of money. He had a family and 2 kids, but he was really unsatisfied with what he was doing in life. And he would dream of building something. And the craziest dream he had was a craft beer company. Now, it doesn't sound crazy today, but in the early 80s, it was. There were very few craft beer companies. There was Anchor here in the Bay Area. Sierra Nevada was just kind of starting out, but it wasn't well known. At the time, American beer was a joke, and he started to pursue this idea on nights and weekends. He kept his day job, but he pursued it on nights and weekends until he realized that he really had to make the leap. And the question he asked himself was, what's dangerous and what's scary? It's really scary to leave a safe, comfortable job with benefits and all of those things. It's scary because you're going into the unknown. But the question is, if you stay doing this job that you're not happy with, that that isn't fulfilling, where you don't feel like you're growing, is that dangerous? And that's the question he asked himself. And I think it's a really important question to ask, because the danger there is that you don't pursue this thing that is burning inside of you. It's not to say that you jump out of an airplane without a parachute.
Right.
Because most of the people who've been on the show who have had to kind of make that calculation, is this dangerous or scary? They still have a backup plan. And Jim Koch did too. He knew that he could always go back to consulting. He could always go back to some other profession, or if he wanted to. And I think that's a really important moment that a lot of us will confront at some point. And it's not always about leaving a job to start a business. It may be about leaving a job to start another job. It may be about doing something that with an element of risk.
In your own case, when you went so you're hosting this weekend show, it's on the radio, this thing that we know, and then you decide that to pursue your voice and an interesting life and another set of experiences, you're going to go into this thing called podcasting. What is that, right? When you did it, that's kind of like, what is that? Did you kind of have in your own mind like a backup plan? Like, okay, I'm going to have this foray, and if it doesn't work, at least I'll be able to do this. Like, how did you sort of have peace of mind doing that?
My backup plan was I was married and I'm still married to the same person, and my wife has a job, and so I was like, my backup plan is if it all fails, at least she has a job, so we can live off her income for a while.
Uh-huh.
I mean, here's the thing. It's a strange thing, but in 2009, we had our first kid. We've got 2 kids, and something about that experience for me was very powerful when it came to my ambitions. In every way, my ambitions to get to the next level or do the next thing, they ended. And it wasn't that I lacked ambition or lacked a burning desire to try to do interesting things. It was that my focus really was about this human. And it's strange because that was so liberating for me. It was such a liberating moment for me to say, I'm not going to be worried about my career, my prestige. And that had a huge impact on my decision to leave the radio with, I had a radio show on 800 stations with millions of listeners to go into this thing called podcasting. I did this in 2012 when no one really listened to podcasts. And I knew that I wanted to do something different and totally radically different from what I had been doing. And I wanted to be able to break the rules that I felt I was under in the news side of things. And that was the opportunity to collaborate with TED and to make this show about TED Talks, the TED Radio Hour. And I really wanted to make a show about the human experience, grief, joy, imagination, curiosity, collaboration, and talk about it in this like multidisciplinary way. And I really, I can't explain what it was, but I didn't care if it was going to be successful or not. Of course I wanted it to be, but I was so focused on just the joy of making something that was breaking all the rules and that was, I was outside of the news world, that I just didn't care. It didn't, the success of the show, of course we got lucky and it became successful, but it didn't genuinely matter. And I think just the pursuit of the mission of making something that I loved and I thought somebody would love was enough. It was enough to get me out of bed in the morning. And I think that's why, in some ways, I don't know. I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid of the leap because I was motivated just by the joy of doing this thing. It seemed to be a much more powerful motivator.
That's so, like, what you're saying, frankly, to me, it's kind of counterintuitive, because you think when someone becomes a parent, then like the feeling of, oh my God, I got to survive is even stronger. But you're describing this process of like just your creativity being unlocked because the center of your life changed. And like, that makes sense to me. It's interesting.
It really was, for me, very liberating, because I stopped worrying so much about what other people thought of me or or pleasing my parents or whatever it was, because those things are real. Those things are very real. It was a liberating moment, which helped me to feel more comfortable and confident to take smaller and then bigger risks over time. And this is really an important point, because in some ways, I'm an avatar for our audience, right? I interview people for the book and for the show, and I'm trying to channel their questions, but I'm also trying to channel their experience, because I identify with them. Right. I think of myself as a person listening and saying, God, but how am I going to do that? How am I going to, how am I going to start Stacy's Pita Chips? I'm just throwing an idea out there. How am I? And what I'm trying to do on the show is to say, it takes practice. All of this takes practice. It's about exposing yourself to rejection and even small failures and setbacks. And each time you're going to get better at dealing with it when it happens again. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it's a practice. It's like any other practice. And those experiences that I had, those challenges and the failures, and then the small victories, and then, the small risks that led to some cool, results, that gave me the confidence to go to the next step.
Right, right. And there's so much power in that too, Guy, that when you see your role as being a stand-in for your listener, as opposed to like proving how smart you are to your guests, it just opens up a level of conversation and oxygen. Like that's something I've really enjoyed about your work. Something that I think you've done, when I think about like your legacy, Guy, like what did Guy do, like writ large? I think that basically you've popularized the term entrepreneurship, like that word, that term, entrepreneurship, frankly, like nobody else in modern America at this point. I don't think that's an overstatement. I think that that is actually what you've done. And I want to talk with you a bit. I want you to talk at me rather, a bit about like your cast of characters. Okay. First of all, like, who's one of the toughest interviews you had? Like you had to work for what you got.
Yeah, I mean, God, I've had a bunch of interviews that are really tough, not because the person is difficult. It's more because the person is so filled with humility that they have a very difficult time talking about themselves. Roxanne Quimby of Burt's Bees is a great example. I mean, that's a wonderful episode. I love that episode. I love Roxanne. But she was so nervous because she just didn't want to talk about herself. She didn't think that she was interesting enough. I mean, it's amazing, right? It's such a cool story and a cool brand. And that's happened, time and again, where, you wouldn't know by hearing it because I'm interviewing people for 3, sometimes 4 hours, really trying to trigger memories.
3 or 4 hours.
And really trying to get them to recount their journey, because the thing is that, and it's like any kind of pursuit, when it's about something bigger than yourself, when it's not about the pursuit of money or fame or glory, but it's about something bigger, it's easier to fulfill the mission. And it's kind of how I present it to the guest on the show. What I say to the guest is, look, I'm asking you to be generous. I'm asking you to come on and just bare your soul, and not because I'm looking for some like viral moment in our interview to put out on the internet, because I'm not going to do that anyway. It's because I want our listeners to know you, like I know you because you wrote this beautiful book, Arthi, and you really, you just opened it up. You opened yourself up. And I want people listening to the show to have that experience. I want them not only to identify with the person, but to really understand what they did right and wrong in order to help themselves. Because I'm making this show in a sense as as a way for people to think about their own lives. And they don't have to be entrepreneurs. It's designed to kind of spark ideas. And really, I know it sounds a little hokey, but I really want this show to be inspiring to people. I want people to walk away from every episode and say, I feel like I'm charged up, like I can take on this day.
Right.
And the reason why I come to that is because there's so many reasons to feel despair right now. I don't have to enumerate them. We all know what they are.
Yeah.
We're in just such a really difficult moment.
Right.
And I'm not one of these people who's like, I'm optimistic. It's great. Everything's wonderful.
What are you talking about? What pandemic?
I think it's nonsense, right? I mean, there are many reasons to be distressed, especially if for all of us here in California who've been living with toxic air for the last, month. What I will say is I'm a big believer in possibility. And I've come to that over the years through my shows, through the people I get to interview on TED Radio Hour and how I built this. By being exposed to incredible ideas and also, incredible moments of challenge and triumph and failure and loss and everything in between. I mean, I want the people who hear the show, whether they're building a company or introducing a new idea out into the world or just need some structure to figure out how to shake up their life. I want this show to maybe play a small role in that process. And the book, of course, that's what I'm hoping it does, because I know how lonely any journey can be. It can be
Right.
extremely lonely and challenging. I've had really challenging moments in my life. I've dealt with depression. I've been on antidepressants in my life and have had incredibly low moments. And when all of us, when we're in those places and spaces, we need inspiration. We need those shots in the arm. And so one of the things that really I really hope this does is give people that shot.
I think you're saying it, but I just want to pose it this way, and we will shortly get to questions coming from viewers, and so you can please keep those questions coming in as well. Reading as you're talking, they're really good. A lot of people, Guy, feel lost. Okay, I don't know what I care about. You hear that all the time, and across the spectrum. Like here in Silicon Valley, you'll often encounter people with inordinate access to resources, but I don't know what I'm passionate about, or trying to manufacture a passion that does not exist. Or people who are far less privileged, where problems are punching you in the face, but it's disorienting and you're not sure what to care about. You spend a lot of time interviewing people who to some extent have figured it out. A lot of people haven't. And so if you're that person who's like, I don't know what I care about, what do you say to that person?
I love this question because I'm so not a believer in passion. Passion is, it's great if you have a natural passion. You're really lucky. But most of us don't have a natural passion. Most of us, many of us don't ever have real passions. Maybe we develop them over time. I mean, if you ask me what my passions are, I'm really passionate about being a father. I'm really passionate about cooking. I'm really passionate about, about reading, reading certain books and journals. But when it comes to what I do, I'm really passionate about talking to people and pulling the stories out of them. Now, could I have told you that 20 years ago? This is my passion? No. I mean, here's how I did it. And here's how I think a lot of the people on the show do it. They follow their curiosity. We are all hardwired to be curious about the world. And if you need evidence of that, ask a child, a 3-year-old, a couple of questions, and then, or a 4-year-old, and they'll start asking about the bugs on the ground and the stars in the sky and how far away is that the sun and can we ever go there? I mean, we're naturally curious, a curious species. It's just part of who we are.
Right.
And over time, it gets beaten out of us. We get our jobs and we go to them and we encounter the real world around us, and then there's bureaucracy in our companies, and you hear a lot of no's, and you got to do this, and you can't do it that way, and we lose it. But to regain it is actually really easy, and it's just a matter of opening yourself up to ideas, to following your curiosity. And it might start with something small. It might start with a curiosity about something you see, on social media, and it opens up a different world, a rabbit hole. I've always loved going down rabbit holes. And for me, following my curiosity is really what led me to doing a show about entrepreneurs. Because it's not, it wasn't an inevitable journey. It wasn't like 10 years ago, I had an idea in my head 10 years ago, but it wasn't inevitable. And 20 years ago, for sure it wasn't.
Packaged as such, right?
It really came about by being really curious about stories. And, and in the case of how I built this, it really came out of my interest in epic stories, like Joseph Campbell kind of myths, the Star Wars and the Gilgamesh and Harry Potter and just those epics, because through those epics, I started to connect the dots that basically led me to say, hey, wait a minute. The story of Starbucks is a hero's journey, or the story of, name any product we've had on the show, or company. I mean, it's a
whether it's razor blades or tight underwear. Exactly.
Exactly. I mean, there are incredible highs and incredible lows, and despair and loss and catastrophe and triumph. I mean, there are all those things that happen. And so, as I started to connect the dots, I was able to kind of see that there was a way to tell these stories, but through the prism of business.
Right.
I didn't go to business school. I don't have that background, but over the years, I've developed an incredible passion for it. simply by following my curiosity. And so I think that's really the connection. It's
I love
not
that.
about what's your passion. It's
what's your
curiosity and follow it.
That's super concrete. There's an opposite problem I want you to talk about as well for a moment. And, a way I'll describe that opposite problem is for people who no, they're doing the thing, but then there's imposter syndrome or some version of that term. I thought about this because actually I spoke to another person close to you. This whole event was my excuse to talk to your friends. The person I spoke with, I hope you're a little red or something. He is, I believe, also a national treasure, Ramtin Arablouei. Here's what he had to say.
So when I first started at NPR to work with Guy on How I Built This, he recruited me basically to come work with him on this show, and I'd never had experience in journalism, ever. So I felt really inadequate in a lot of ways. I didn't feel like I had the experience or the education level that a lot of other people did. And I didn't think I was a good writer, but at every single turn, Guy encouraged me, and not in an irrational, he's just doing this to be nice. He encouraged me in a way that he made me feel like he could see something in me before anyone else did. And in one moment, I remember I was feeling really, really desperate. I was feeling like maybe this isn't for me. This is about 4 or 5 months in. And I remember a guy, unprompted, looked at me and said, this is where you belong, man. You don't need to go back out on tour or sitting in a studio just mixing albums. This is where you belong. Your ideas belong here. Your work belongs here. And I don't even probably think he probably is not gonna remember that. But in that moment, it did so much for me.
So that was Ramtin Arablouei, host of the spectacular podcast Throughline. Do you remember, Guy Raz, the moment he was talking about?
No, I love him so much. You're gonna make me cry. Ramtin is, and for anyone who doesn't know Throughline, it's one of the most incredible podcasts out there. Ramtin, I met him. He was a DJ, and I met him through a friend, and I just liked. There's something about him I liked right away, and he said, "Hey, if you ever have any work at NPR, let me know. I've never done radio, but I've mixed music." And 9 months later, I got a little bit of money to develop How I Built This. Just 1 month, like $5,000, nothing. And I called him. I was like, "Look, I'll teach you what I know. Come by for a month." And the rest is history. 5 years later, he now has his own show.
Mm-hmm.
He writes all the music for How I Built This. He writes all the music for many other NPR podcasts, including Throughline. Yeah. He wrote the theme song for How I Built This. I mean, he's just such a talented person. And, it's so interesting to hear other people talk about imposter syndrome or, I didn't know if I was good enough. And it's so funny because I used to, and I still try to do this. I love talking to interns, and I always make a point to talk to the NPR interns or interns anywhere I can. And one of the first questions I ask is raise your hand if you feel like you don't belong here, like someone made a mistake. Because I remember that feeling in 1997 when I got to NPR, and I was like, how do they pick me? I'm not as smart as these other people.
Mm-hmm.
The crazy thing is, and what I've realized is that really doesn't go away. I still have a version of that inside of me. There's still something inside of me where why do people listen to me? Or why do people listen to my shows? Or, when people say very nice things about me, I'm like, but, I know me and I don't think but of course, I understand and now in my mid 40s have come to believe that, yes, I'm pretty good at what I do, but there are days where I don't believe that. There really are days where I'm like, no, I, and it becomes more manageable over time. But I think that this idea that, I don't belong or I'm not good enough to be here is something that is very common. I think a lot of the people who've been on the show feel a version of that too.
Right.
And I actually think it's healthy. I think it's healthy for us to be self-reflective and have some self-doubt.
Right.
And to kind of be a gut check on ourselves. Otherwise,
keeps you on your toes.
I'd be a horrible person.
So self-satisfied, yeah. I am going to turn to audience questions soon. I have one more, Guy, because Listen, there are so many things I could ask about the moment we're in. I mean, choose the moment you're talking about. There's so many things going on, but you know, I decided to pick one of the many moments we're in. And that specifically is about the reckoning going on in newsrooms, the media reckoning, the industry that you and I are both part of. A lot of that reckoning is now at least focused on racism and sexism endemic to our workplaces. And as we both know from covering business extensively, crisis is often a great time to reimagine. Okay. Never waste a good crisis, they say.
Never.
So, as newsrooms are thinking about who we are, what we do, whom we connect to, who does and doesn't trust us, what's something you would like newsroom leaders, the leaders of our industry, to consider? Lessons that feel timely to you.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, there's so much, you know. I mean, I think let me start with myself, because I can answer that question about myself. And I'm not in a news environment, but you know, I'm in the media and am a media figure. And as strange as this may sound, my ultimate goal is to make myself obsolescent. You know, I don't believe that especially people like me should be holding on to their jobs and their positions of power, whether they understand that or not. They are positions of power forever and ever. It doesn't actually make sense, and it actually results in worse content over time. So there will be a moment, there will be a time where I won't be doing this, and somebody else will be doing it, or will make it better. I mean, one of the reasons why I left TED Radio Hour, my other show, is in part because of that. You know, I did it for 7 years. I love doing it. It's an incredible show, an amazing experience. But like, does the world need, you know, Guy Raz to have like 5 shows and to hear, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to, you know, I think that there, you know, for me, that was one step. Here's what I would say in terms of like the news world and what has to happen and what should happen. And I have a really, I think, I've always had a very different view of this. One of the challenges that I had when I was in the news side of things and when I was a news reporter was, I didn't believe in this notion of objectivity, because the notion of objectivity was determined by a very narrow band of people who were, you know, who decided what it meant to be objective in the 70s and 80s, and they looked the same, and I'm not disparaging them. I mean, there's an argument to be made that news organizations need to be detached and so on and so forth. But you know, we are living at a time and a moment where news organizations, I believe, have a responsibility to not call balls and strikes, which is the way they've seen themselves traditionally, but to actually weigh in on the great moral questions of the day. Even if some people don't like it, and even if people say, well, I don't, you know, who are you as a moral arbiter? I think there's been a lot of fear, you know, among news managers and within news organizations to be moral arbiters. But the reality is that news organizations and news people are absorbing a lot of information. They are taking in accounts of things from various angles and various sides. And if they're good at what they do, they're absorbing a lot of different perspectives. And to me, it's never made sense that there's this kind of morally relative stance, this detached, disassociated stance. I don't think it's good for democracy. I think that there are some news organizations today that have done a better job, especially in light of what we're facing today. You know, with you know, I think,
do you want to name them?
Forces in this country that are really just hacking away at our democracy, which is really, I don't even want to use the word alarming, because it's beyond that. It's destructive for all of us. It's destructive for them and their supporters. It's going to corrode all of us. And I wish that news organizations would take a firmer stand and be bolder and say, you know what? We have a responsibility to actually uphold and defend democracy, and to do it in a clear way that, that isn't equivocal, but that is actually unequivocal.
Mm-hmm. That's great. It's so interesting, Guy, because that word objectivity, I think, becomes a way to be blind to your own biases.
Yes.
And so you're actually even less objective than you may have been had you not said you were. I'm going to turn now to some of the questions that we get from the audience. Let's start with this one from Josie. What advice can you give, Guy Raz, to young people starting out in their career in the midst of COVID with no clear idea of what is ahead of us?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really challenging moment. I think that in some ways, and just bear with me for a moment, it's going to sound strange, but in some ways, this is a time to consider taking a risk that you might not take in an otherwise, a time when, let's say, there's lots of opportunity for employment. Here's why. Because we are living at a time when it's not really clear whether the quote unquote safe job that you have is actually going to be safe. All the things that we've been told about finding and pursuing a safe job, it may actually become meaningless over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. The other thing I would say is that if there's a way for you to think about building something on your own, or maybe partnering with somebody to come up with an idea, now to me is one of the most incredible times to do it. Even as strange as this might sound, because we're in an economic crisis and all this craziness is happening around us. But if you look at some of the companies now that are so incredibly resilient, like Microsoft or FedEx or Hewlett Packard, even Airbnb, which remarkably, it had 60% drop in its business at the beginning of this year, and now it's back to where it was last year. But they actually built resilience within their brand because all these companies were started in the midst of financial economic crises. So Airbnb had the experience of going through 2008 because they started in 2008. It means that in 2020, they knew what to do very quickly to survive and then to stay afloat. And so I think that people who can come up with a business idea now are actually who can think about a problem that you see in the world and begin to think about how you can solve that problem. Now is actually an incredible moment to try and start that. I'm not saying if you have a day job, I'm not saying quit your day job, but I'm saying that now is a moment, especially because we're stuck inside, to really begin to think about what you might be able to do on your own. Now is the time to start to research and to think and to ask questions and to observe the world around you, with an idea. Because if you can start something that makes it through this period, this really challenging period, it will sort of bake into your whatever it is you build. It will bake resilience into it, and in the future, anybody will be able to throw anything at you, and you will most likely be able to withstand it. So that's my advice. I can also give you another piece of advice for people who are just starting out, which is try getting a job in sales and marketing. Sales builds resilience because you're going to hear a lot of people saying no, and you're going to need to get accustomed to hearing no when you actually go out and start something on your own.
That's great. And it sounds like, Guy, that to do that, it takes not being so distracted by your own anxiety about the uncertainty of the moment to then go back to this, what you described as curiosity, whether it's a side hustle or the main thing you focus on, to know how to listen to that part of yourself.
And look, anxiety is a real thing. I'm not saying that just suppress your anxiety. There are ways to control it. And I've learned that over the course of my life. And I, like everybody, I still get anxiety. I wake up in the middle of the night freaking out about things, about the world around me. And so there are ways that I manage it. I exercise every day. I meditate every day. Those things are not always easy for everyone to do. But what I would say is that we all need to be reminded of our capabilities and the things we can do. And, call it self-help or meditation or mantras or whatever it is. But there's a reason why, it works. There's a reason why people seek out inspiring ideas and stories, because we need that. If we're exposed only to to fear and negativity, we internalize it, and that makes sense. I mean, that's how all creatures behave. And so we need to kind of remind ourselves that there are other things out there. There's possibility out there. And so, yes, anxiety is real, but we also have the capacity to manage it within reason. And however you choose to do it, you gotta do it. You gotta actively work towards it.
There's a question from Jonah, switching gears. The VC community, venture capital community, is notoriously white male, and they invest in what they know. What do you do to seek out diverse stories?
It's such a great question. I mean, we have basically 45 episodes a year, main episodes, and now we do a resilience series. And we have a very simple rule. At least 25% of any interview I do has to be a person of color, and at least 50% of my interviews have to be women. So we're not, we're right now, if you look at all of our episodes over the past 40 years, about 50% of our episodes have been women and or people of color. And that's our North Star, and by the way, it's not our North Star because it's like the right thing to do. It's our North Star because having an entrepreneur community of white and Asian men is boring. The result, and I'm a white man. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying
I agree with you.
Great ideas. What I'm saying is it's not. We suffer as consumers.
Right.
We suffer as citizens when we don't have the opportunity to be exposed to all kinds of incredible ideas. And so one of the most important reasons why we seek out entrepreneurs of color and women entrepreneurs is because I need people hearing the show who are women and people of color to hear themselves in those stories. So we just did an episode on Tope Awatana, the founder of Calendly. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the notes I got from Black entrepreneurs saying, I just really appreciate hearing his story because the message it sends to me is I can do this too. And so that's absolutely critical. Like we, for better or worse, we're a really big show now and we have millions of listeners a week. And so if there's one thing I can do to inspire, a 16-year-old or a 25-year-old or whoever listening who's a brown or black or a non-white person or even a white, anybody, but to inspire them to hear themselves in the stories of somebody who is like them, that's huge. I can die a happy person.
Yeah, here's a question from Tara. I'm going to tweak it just slightly. Audio is growing rapidly as a medium for listening to things. How do you compare audio to TV and print? What can you do in audio that you can't in TV or print?
You can build an entire world in audio. You can do it in print too. Obviously novels are a great example of that. But there are real limitations with what you can do in audio and print, in video and print versus audio. Let me try to illustrate this. Do you remember when you were a kid? And I don't know how old you are, but if you're my age, you had one telephone in your house and it had a long cord. And you had, and I remember when I was in 5th grade, I'd get on the phone, or 7th grade, like middle school, and I'd take that cord and I'd walk around the corner to the closet and I'd close the door, the coat closet, and I'd have a conversation with a friend on the phone. It was dark and I only heard their voice. Those were some of the most powerful, meaningful conversations I had in my young life at the time. And the reason why is because our brains are designed to process visual information. Like 70% of our brain is focused on, I'm looking at Arthi now, you're looking at me. We have these amazing computers. So what happens is we don't actually process voice. And the voice has as many interesting dimensions as the face does. We've got thousands of muscles in our face that move and signal and communicate without communicating. Our voice does too. And to me, it's why audio is so much more intimate and powerful. I remember when I left audio, now 15 years ago, and went to CNN.
Mm-hmm.
So many people said, "Where'd you go? Where are you?" And it wasn't that they weren't seeing me on television. It was just that their connection to me was very different. Seeing me on television, it's not the same. I'm talking to a huge number of people on TV. I'm also talking to a huge number of people on my podcast, but really I'm just talking to you because you have my voice in your earbuds. And so there's a one-to-one relationship. Even though it's 3.5 million people, I really am delivering the message right to you, right to your ears. And that's an intimacy that you just can't replicate with those other mediums.
It's interesting. It's like, as you're explaining this, Guy, I'm thinking about how, listen, I've been listening to you this entire talk we've been having. I know that I would be hearing you more intimately if I were not seeing you.
Yeah.
Like that layer, that visual layer is actually distracting me from connection.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? Yeah, I just find that so strange.
No, you're right. You're right.
You've interviewed so many people. John wants to know, who's an interview at the top of your bucket list? Shout out the name and make a wish.
All right. We've been very fortunate on the show that we've been able to interview pretty much everyone we wanted to. And the reason why is that when we approach people who are willing to be on the show but come with conditions, we politely decline. And we'll say, hey, we get it. We just can't do that. So, I've had some prominent founders approach us, but they have conditions. They don't want to talk about this. They don't want to talk about that. And so my response to them is like, when you're ready to talk to us, that's, when you're ready to talk to us without conditions, let's do it that way.
Who do we want to be ready to talk to you?
Well, I think that one of the things that one of the people I've loved to talk to would be like Barack Obama. And even though his story's been told and he's got a biography coming out, I'd really love to talk to him about building that campaign of 2008, which I think would be just amazing to hear his story.
Right. All that infrastructure from the ground. Yeah. All the experimentation in it. That makes sense. So one more question we have over here is, have you ever gotten, and this is from Mariana, have you ever gotten advice that was a surprise to you? Advice that you found good but surprising?
Yeah, I've had so much advice that I've gleaned from the shows and from the people I've interviewed. I'll tell you one piece of advice that is just very practical, and I use it all the time. I interviewed Danny Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner, several years ago, Thinking Fast and Slow. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the book. And I interviewed him, and he had just returned from Geneva at the time. I said, "Oh, how was your trip to Geneva?" And he said, "We left early. We left 3 days early. It was great." And I said, "Oh, why did you leave 3 days early?" And he said, when I'm actually enjoying myself, either on vacation or an event, I always leave right when I'm feeling great. And I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" He says, "Yeah, if I'm at a dinner party or a party, once I'm like really feeling great, I leave because I know and I've studied how the human brain remembers things, and we remember the last things most intensely. And I don't want to risk having a bad memory of an experience. So when things are going great, I leave. And I've taken that to heart. I love that advice."
You're not about to hang up, are you? So.
No.
I think they call that an Irish exit, or maybe that's not exactly the same.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. You don't say goodbye.
Right.
Exactly. Right.
Right.
That makes so much sense. Also, he says from a neurological perspective. And how has it been, Guy, book touring in COVID? This is a very different experience you're having.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I've done probably 5 times the number of interviews that I would have done if I was on the road and touring. And so I've been very efficient because I can get a lot done, and I originally was going to take 2 weeks off to do this, but now I can still do the show. So that's an advantage. The disadvantage is I can't meet people. I can't interact with our listeners and audience and exchange ideas. So that's been weird. But I have to say that we're making the best out of it, and I'm able to have conversations like this with you. I mean, it would be great if we could be in San Francisco right now in front of an audience, and then I could hang out after and chat longer. But
something, right? But do you enjoy not having the travel time?
Yeah, I think that's been pretty great. I mean, before COVID, I was on an airplane 3 or 4 times a week. I lived at SFO, right. So that's been a nice break. But it's hard to say nice when we're in this very challenging moment. That's been really difficult for so many people.
Right. So Guy Raz, host of How I Built This and author of How I Built This, the two. Fantastic book. I should mention, Guy, I thought that what you wrote was so lucid and easy to digest and practical. And I really did find myself, I was like reading your book and doing the audiobook, switching in between while hiking on Sunday. And I literally found myself stopping to make a note to myself about something that I'm currently building, or just sort of correct some things that I had previously written. It was a great amount. I felt like I got to have a conversation with you about my idea. That's what the book
I love
did for
that.
me.
That's why I wrote this book. I wrote this book for exactly that reason, to help you kind of think about ideas and think about how you would build it.
I think that it definitely did that for me. The last question we have, it is actually an Inforum tradition, Guy Raz, to ask all of our speakers the following question. The question is, what is your 60-second idea to change the world?
Cut the military budget in half and allocate it at least in half, maybe 2/3, and allocate it entirely to climate change, to building massive, solar deserts, solar panels in deserts all across the country, to building carbon capture, fields in unused land all over the country, and to take really aggressive action now and to deploy the technology we have now. It's not perfect, but some of it's good enough. We just don't have time. We've got to do it now, and we've got the money to do it if we can begin by taking half of it from the military.
Very practical and thought out and interesting. Thank you, Guy Raz. So I want to thank you for joining us at Inforum at the Commonwealth Club. We would like to remind our audience that Guy Raz's book, How I Built This, is now available for purchase at your preferred bookseller. If you'd like to watch virtual programs or support the Commonwealth Club's efforts in making virtual programming, please visit commonwealthclub.org/online. I'm Aarti Shahani. Thank you so much and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dan Ashley, the evening news anchor for ABC 7 News in San Francisco, and I hope you and your loved ones are staying safe, healthy, and comfortable during these very challenging times. I am also a proud board member of the Commonwealth Club, one of our most important Bay Area institutions. The club has been hosting wonderful events with exciting speakers and topics in the Bay Area for over a century. In times of crisis, good information and strong connections in our community are especially important. And during the current COVID-19 crisis, the club has really stepped up. Since March 6th, the club has brought you over 200 live-streamed events with speakers and panelists, including past governors, secretaries of state, university presidents, and noted health experts. Every program includes a live chat, so you and viewers all over the Bay Area and beyond have been able to ask these experts the questions that are on your minds. Every program has been neutral and unbiased in true Commonwealth Club style to get to the bottom of the issues that are so drastically affecting our lives. The club has done all this public service despite being profoundly affected by the crisis. The inability to hold events for the past 2 months has forced the club to cut its budget and staffing by 50%. The remaining staff are working from home to bring the community these valuable and informative live-streamed programs. The club needs your support to continue its shelter-at-home programming. Please make a tax-deductible donation to the club now by texting the word DONATE to 329-4231. That is, donate to 329-4231, or visit the Commonwealth Club website, commonwealthclub.org. We need the club to be here in the months and years ahead to help inform and educate as we figure out how to get our society and our economy safely moving again, consider changes to the way we live, and work as a result of this crisis, and take steps to prevent a future pandemic. Once again, please support the Commonwealth Club now by texting the word DONATE to 329-4231. That is, donate to 329-4231, or visit the website commonwealthclub.org. I want to personally thank you for supporting one of our community's truly great organizations. I'll see you on ABC 7 News and at the Commonwealth Club. Stay safe.